You know what time it is when the special presentation hits. Welcome back to the Black Rasslin Podcast, special edition of the Black Rasslin Podcast. Because obviously you see me and the two people you don't normally see. You've seen this person before. You've never seen this person on Black Rasslin, but there's a reason why everybody's here. And I want to say, my joke is I've been given you pro wrestling historians and you fans of amazing arenas worldwide. I've been giving y'all a couple weeks to take in When Giants Walked Here. It's a new documentary. These two co-produced it about the Dorton Arena in North Carolina, as well as if you're a pro wrestling buff, if you want to know the rise and fall of Jim Crockett Promotions, everything is right there, including an awesome telling of a Ric Flair Buddy Landell match. I enjoyed that segment immensely. These two, we've got award-winning filmmaker Cliff Bumgardner here. We've got Chris Lea. You know him as the voice of Ashe Wrestling, but my man's an Edward R. Murrow Award-winning as well as an Emmy nominee 2 times, right?
Yeah.
Two times.
Yeah.
First up,
another one.
Yeah, how about that? We on the way. Shouts out PBS. But that's how I want to, Cliff, Chris, whoever wants to start first. Being from North Carolina, I imagine I'm going to assume you guys have been around the Dorton Arena, regularly. I did not know the history of it at all like that before I watched the documentary. But what's the seed of the conversation of A, let's do a documentary, and B, let's focus it on this unique structure, and then start to, tell these tales about pro wrestling that, are so tied to the community?
Yeah, totally. I can kick us off because I kind of was the starting point on this one. Like I said, I'm from North Carolina, born and raised right here in Raleigh, where Dorton is, and growing up a huge wrestling fan. I didn't actually get to go to Dorton because we had a period of 20 plus years where there was no wrestling there.
Right.
But my dad would tell me about it, and he'd say, oh man, Ric Flair used to be there, and he would name the people from his era, the Wahoo McDaniels and the, people like that. And so I always grew up knowing that history. And over the years, I'd tell people, other people, it's hard to miss Dorton. If you're from Raleigh, you see it every year at the fairgrounds. You see it all the time.
Right.
It's a hard place to miss. And so whenever the building came up, or if I'd be nearby, I'd go, well, that's a really important place for wrestling. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people just didn't know that history. And there's not really any markers there to talk about it. It's not really something that, gets acknowledged, I think, to the extent that it should. Mm-hmm. And so I just got interested in researching it, learning more about it, to see if there was a story there. And when I started to get into it, I started to see, like you mentioned, Crockett, mm-hmm. how many of these important pieces of wrestling history cross paths with Dorton. And I started to see that you could tell a Crockett story in Dorton. You could tell this real piece of wrestling history, of territory, Southern wrestling history through the lens of Dorton. And you could tell the Dorton story through the lens of wrestling. And they just paired up really nicely. Mm-hmm. I didn't know Chris at the time, actually. We had briefly crossed paths at WRL when I used to work there. But I sent him an email thinking that he would just give me an interview or help me coordinate a couple of things. And here we are 3 years later as business partners, having done this whole movie together. That's been a really fun part of it. So I can let Chris pick it up since he got my, hey, I want to make a documentary email.
Yeah. I was going to say, Chris is probably like, wait, what? This sounds like, I can imagine, but talk about that, Chris. What was your immediate reaction when you got that email?
It was a godsend because it was part of what I wanted to do when I came to WRL. I tell people this story, but I had somebody from CNN give me the advice of putting pro wrestling on my resume. I used to be a pro wrestler in North Carolina back between 2012, 2016. And that's how me and Darius Lockhart became really good friends. And so many other people who came through North Carolina at that time. And so, I put wrestling on my resume. And when WRL called me at the end of 2019, it was supposed to be a 15-minute phone interview. The first 15 minutes of 45 minutes was spent talking about wrestling.
Right.
And the guy who would eventually hire me, who was my boss, who just retired, has done stories on wrestling in North Carolina where he's taking suplexes off the top rope from Steve Corino, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I knew that there was a rich history of wrestling in Raleigh, and also at WRL in the same studio I do sports in every single night. That's the studio where Ric Flair and Steamboat's feud began in the early 80s. And so I always wanted to do something with wrestling at WRL. And then I start there March 4th, 2020, the week before the pandemic. So, of course, I'm asking all the wrestling questions early. When the pandemic happens, all the people I'm talking to are gone. They're at home, and I'm there, and, you know, there's nothing there. So there was a waiting period. So once I got that email from Cliff, because, you know, we didn't know what was going on, and TV stations, at least mine, was extra cautious to keep people away from each other. I was like, finally, I can collab with somebody on something like this. And I've never done a documentary before up until that point. Ended up doing another one. You know, that was a godsend for me, and it was perfect because I wanted to get into this space of telling pro wrestling stories through an independent lens.
Indeed. Well, so you get the idea, Dorton. Obviously, I want to say, I was looking at pictures, because you see the structure, and the structure itself is already like, it's massive. I love the what was it, the Futuramic, the look at, you know, their idea of the modern future and what with the way they designed the structure. But then I wasn't like, because of my job, shouts out to, you know, being able to like go to different places and see different, you know, like basketball arenas, you know, different places, going to different places where indie wrestling is. I was not prepared for literally like walking through the doors and, all right, my seat's right here, and then everything else is just windows. Like, that's like researching the structure itself. Talk about, you know, what you found out about the building, and like, you know, what was that process like for you guys? I'm assuming your minds were blown by some of the things you were finding out. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. So, you know, being a big wrestling fan and a wrestling history fan, like that, some of that was kind of the easy part. It was digging into that stuff that we didn't know about the building itself. That was really rewarding. We talk about this a little bit in the documentary, but just to give an overview of it, Dorton was built right after World War II, and it was designed by a Polish architect who saw architecture as more than just building buildings. He saw it as a way to literally bring people together. He had seen fascism, the rise of fascism in Poland during the war, and he wanted to build a progressive future. And he saw that the way to do that was something that we take for granted now. We've got major arenas. You mentioned wrestling arenas, sporting arenas, NBA arenas, all that kind of stuff. That wasn't as big of a thing back then. That wasn't something that was as common. And so he had this vision of, if you make, you know, the term of civic center, you know, when you go into Dorton, there's no beams that block your way. Right. There's nothing in the way. So there's nothing between you and somebody else, and you and the action. And so it really was made to be a completely open space. There's no VIP boxes. There's no seating. You know, there's none of that. There's no hierarchy. There's no social hierarchy in that building. And that was done very, very intentionally. And also, you know, for the message and the motive at the time, and also happens to make for a great wrestling venue when you have that.
Yes. Yeah, seeing some of these images, like I love looking at stuff like this. Like everybody, hearing you talk about, you know, building a sense of community. I mean, I think the design of this is perfect, but I think really hearing the stories about, you know, I'll see you next week, and, you know, people then coming back and greeting each other and, you know, kind of catching up on things. That's been really cool. Chris, did you have did you have any tie? You didn't have any ties at all to the arena?
A little bit. I'm from the Greensboro area, so when I moved to Raleigh, some of that was new to me. But my dad grew up in a place called Yanceyville, North Carolina, which is essentially kind of northeast of Greensboro and northwest of Raleigh. And so as a kid, his father would take him to wrestling events at the Greensboro Coliseum and at Dorton Arena, and so he had experience going to both. And so I did always hear stories, just like Cliff did, about Dorton Arena, but also heard a lot of stories about Greensboro. But growing up, my reality was more so Greensboro, Winston-Salem, which is the places where WCW would run a lot as a kid. And so I never got a chance to experience anything in Dorton. And so this was almost like an education for me to learn a little bit more about a building I'd always heard about, had always seen, and, you know, seen the weird shape it has and all of that. For people who don't know, like, Dorton is on the same fairgrounds close to where PNC Arena is, where the Carolina Hurricanes play their hockey. But it's also right there next to NC State, where they play their football at Carter Finley Stadium. So if you go to any of those things or the state fair, you see it. It's right there.
It's right there.
Prominent. And so it's one of those things I've always seen. And so it was good to kind of, put a story inside of a building and be able to kind of see that through this project.
No, yeah, like it again, being able to get that, because it's really like a really dope. If you've not watched the documentary yet, you probably should stop this, watch it, and then come back. But it's the beginning section of it is really key to giving you an overview of the history and origin of the building. And obviously, it tickled me to hear, the one of the main, like, building community, and then what was the thing that built community? Like decades of pro wrestling every Tuesday night in the Dorton Arena. You got a great collection of names in there. I mean, seeing Jimmy Valiant in there was dope. Bobby Fulton was a cool one to see, as well as I liked Earl Hebner, making sure he had his NWA ref gear on. I imagine there's got to be like bloopers upon stories, like, talk about what was it like interviewing? Did you have any favorite interviews or moments with the wrestlers working on some of these stories that made up the documentary?
Yeah, it was a really cool process, and I think that was some of my role in being here, is just trying to get film Cliff into the wrestling world and all of that. So I knew C.W. Anderson from our wrestling days. Like, I've had a match with him. Believe it or not, I teamed up with Jimmy Valiant one time on Thanksgiving night. Yeah, he was my tag team partner, and it went exactly how you thought it would go. The match had a nice little shine. He did his nice little shine. The heels beat up on me. I got him for the hot tag, and then he tagged me back in. I did my splash off the top, and it was 1, 2, 3, and the fans went home happy. So, right. But no, he was a great guy, and I think when we're asked this question, it's always going to Boogie's camp, going to in the middle of nowhere, Virginia. You look up on the top of this hill, and you see Boogie's camp right there, and then you see his house on another hill over to the right of it, and it's just this place of just. It's almost like a pro wrestling fairy tale land on this small little lot, man. Because you go inside of his basically barn there that he has for his ring, and he has pictures all over the wall. So much history, so many people he's trained in there, like Adam Page and others. And so it's kind of cool to see that and witness that history. But then he's such a unique guy in general as well. And he's 82. I think he just turned 82 and still going. Yeah. And he's still going. Like, he was somebody my mom was watching when my mom was little, and my mom is in her 60s. So he's just somebody who's been very good. And at the very end, he leaves us a nice little promo. So it's for folks who stick around after.
Stick around, yeah. Post credit scenes are in the doc. Indeed, yeah.
So no, that was probably the best. The best one, but it was cool having Shane Helm, somebody who I was cool with from before, and a few others that that were in there. So it was really cool to have that collection of guys.
Indeed. One thing I just remembered that we actually haven't talked about in an interview, Chris, I don't think we've talked about this since it happened. When we were interviewing Jimmy, one thing that did get cut is he talked for a while about how many eggs and how much milk he used to drink to bulk up. If you've seen Jimmy back in like the 70s and 80s, he was huge.
He was he's older, but he was very, very skinny in the doc. Yeah.
Now he's like this. He looks like this tiny, older guy. He's still got the beard, so it's still on the take with Jimmy Valiant. But I remember he went on this like tear during the interview, and the whole time I'm going like, we can't use any of this, but it's awesome. I love that Jimmy Valiant's telling me all this is fantastic. I just, as a fan, I'm just sitting here listening.
Right.
Yeah, it was a blast.
I was thinking. I mean, I don't know how what the life of a documentary is, especially if it takes off, gets to get on some of those circuits or what have you. But I could only imagine what like the Blu-ray release of this would be. There's got to be like an extra couple hours, an hour of Jimmy Valiant alone, or like what the unedited interviews look like, because I know those guys can talk, and I
Oh
figured
yeah.
he's the boogie woogie man. He's coming home. He said coming home about 20 times in that promo. I'm
Yep.
sorry.
Yep.
I mentioned earlier in thinking about the structure of the Dorton Arena, it makes that one story about the match between Ric Flair and Buddy Landel that much more fascinating. I can only imagine what what that actually like. I was waiting to see. I like the way it was depicted with the drawings and how it was done in the documentary. I was waiting to see if there was going to be like a photo or anything like that. I what was it difficult getting, because there's a lot of archival photos, especially from the the decades of Jim Crockett Promotions. What was that process like? Was it difficult getting some of that stuff for the doc?
Yeah, there was a lot. We ended up a lot of the photos that are in the documentary. Something I'm really happy about is most of them have never before been seen. The black and white photos that you can see in the trailer and you can see all throughout the film. Those, yeah, exactly. That's one. Those came from the News and Observer, which is the main newspaper here in Raleigh. They were actually all stored at our state archives, and so I early on, just in research, I called up state archives and was like, "Hey, do you guys have anything?" And they said, "Yeah, we have some negatives. Come look." And it was just a treasure trove.
They didn't know what they had.
They had no idea. A handful of those photos were used in the paper back in the day. They'd send a photographer and they might use one or two
Right.
in the paper, but these were the original packs of negatives. And so there was all kinds of stuff that had never been seen, never seen light of day. Everybody from Dusty Rhodes, Roddy Piper. I mean, just some amazing behind the scenes shots that are in the film. So that was the bulk of a lot of the material that we got. There's a handful of other things out there. One of the hard parts is, when wrestling was going on in Dorton, it was every Tuesday night, and it was just one of the mini shows that they were running. And when the lights are off and you've got, old black and white film or old film that's in the magazines or whatever, it's really hard to tell where something is. It wasn't always super organized.
Right.
There wasn't a lot of video done there. It would have been film at the time because they didn't do a lot of television in Dorton. So in a lot of cases, there was a lot of stuff that we found and then would later find, oh, that wasn't actually in Dorton, and we would pull that out. So we ended up,
Okay.
you mentioned the Flair and Landell sequence. We had an entire photo set of a Flair and Landell match that we thought was from Dorton. And I spent weeks tracking down the original photographer who told me, no, I actually took those in Virginia because they would run the same match on the circuit. So it gets really hard. It was coming down to like, what color are the trunks that night?
I've been there.
Something else and like that kind of stuff. So yeah, it got pretty crazy at certain points to really nail down the material. But I'm happy with what we were, ended up being able to show.
And this is a good part to kind of talk about, like, the difference between wrestling now and then. Like, now the big Dorton show, if you were to run there, is probably something that's televised, probably something that's streamed on television that you can see, and you build up to that point. Right. And really kind of what wrestling was then. You did build up to the big show at Dorton, but you did it through your TV product. And the only way to see what was going on at Dorton or the Greensboro Coliseum or, Independence Arena in Charlotte or whatever is you had to be there.
Right.
And so what you saw was the studio wrestling product. You may have gotten some photos or some clips or, whatever. This is what happened in Dorton. This explains why this is happening tonight. We'll have this promo to set up this, and to be there to see what happens, you've got to have your ticket and get there. And that's how wrestling operated. And so, in the time that it was there's a lot of history at Dorton that just, probably just won't come to light because of just the differences. But in a modern day, like, there's probably would have been, a lot of video that would have been used, but it was very different then.
Yeah, well, I think, that's why it's, kudos to the two of you. It takes people who actually care. I've been that guy, Cliff. I don't know if it was, I was trying to figure out. There was a match between Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko in ECW in the middle of the 90s, based off a cage match and like the scanned information that was on YouTube, trying to pinpoint the date based off of his, because I knew it wasn't one match, but based off his trunks, it couldn't have been this other match. But yeah, that's gotta be hellacious. On the flip side, you guys mentioned you'd been on the circuit, doing a lot of these conversations. Have you paid attention to any of the conversations from outside since the review, like since the documentary has premiered and been on the PBS app? Any of the reviews that have been going on, have you guys pay attention to that stuff at all?
Cliff and I couldn't be the more opposite on that. I feel like
really?
I'm looking every day, like I'm searching when Giants walked here, on Twitter, on Facebook, and I'm Googling it just to see what comes up, see what people are saying. When Jim Cornette talked about it on his podcast, and we're thankful for him, and he gave a good review of it. He doesn't like anything,
right?
A documentary, so
right.
That's a good thing. But like, I had to listen to it first and tell Cliff, all right, it's good to listen to. You could, yeah. Like that's kind of how it's been. And, we've even caught, this is cool. I never thought of like what it would be like to be bootlegged, but we've caught two people uploading it on their individual YouTube pages. And at the time when they got taken down, it had thousands of views.
Oh yeah.
So it's just like, this is actually kind of cool that we're getting bootlegged. I mean, we want you to take it down, but it's cool that we're getting bootlegged. And because we want all the numbers, we want PBS to have all the numbers.
Of course,
that makes it look better. And if we want to do some things in the future,
right?
It's also already free.
It's
so
free.
Feeling it's already out there for free. That's the thing that gets me.
But no, it's that's something I look at. And even today, I don't know if you know Rob Naylor, who used to work with WWE, used to be with NXT and all that. He just tweeted that he really enjoyed the documentary, and he thought it was a great job, and he retweeted me on that. What's the old announcer? Gary Michael Capetta from WCW. Tweeted about it. So of course I just told you about Cornette and a few other people, man. So it's been cool to see the reactions, and it's been a lot of positivity. I've had somebody come up to me and say, they had to tell their friends, just get past the architecture, and I promise you wrestling is there.
Come on now.
But it's like we wanted to give a complete story, but that's also what we did a good job.
Well, and that's the funny thing. When we were putting the film together, I told Chris at one point, I said, I feel like if the wrestling people say there's too much architecture and the architecture people say there's too much wrestling, we're probably right where we need to be. Yes. If you don't quite make everybody happy, you're probably in the right place. There's actually two kind of things that have been interesting that have come out, not necessarily negatives, but just two things that have come out since the film was released that are worth talking about. Is I've seen a lot of reviews that's like, oh, this is great, but why wasn't such and such in it? Or why wasn't this person in it? Or why wasn't that person in it? Mm-hmm. And the chances are, if there's someone you wanted to see in the film, so did we. But at the end of the day, we can't make somebody be in a movie if they don't want to be. And there's only so much time and resources. And we really hope, as you mentioned earlier, that this is the beginning of being able to do more storytelling like this and to do other films that are presenting wrestling this way as a cultural history story, as a piece of pop culture, a piece of American history in particular. So we hope that we can continue building on that. And now that people see what we're up to, we those doors are open. The other thing that's interesting and actually came up on Cornette's podcast and a few other places, there's a story going around that has been going around for many years that Roddy Piper was stabbed at Dorton Arena. And I've had several people reach out and go, why isn't that in the film? We actually went deep into a research hole while working on the film, and to the best
we talked about this for weeks.
Yeah, and to the best that we can find, including an interview with Piper himself and a article in the News and Observer written at the time, it didn't actually happen at Dorton. This is a common misconception. That there was a brief period, we don't know exactly how long, maybe 3 years, where Dorton was under renovation and wrestling moved to the Raleigh Convention Center, which was new at the time. And it appears that that's where the show was the night that Roddy was actually stabbed. So he was stabbed in Raleigh, but he himself in a documentary a few years before he died, rather, said that it was the convention center. And that seems to be the case from the reports that we found. So those are a couple of the things that have come up since the movie came out that it's been interesting to see, and a lot of people are chiming in. But
Yeah.
More people talking about wrestling at Dorton, I'm happy. So
No, 100%. And I guess that's kudos to that Tuesday night institution that was built at Dorton, where even if something may not have happened at Dorton, because that's the facility that people know, that's what's going to come out of their mouth when the story's told. Damn, that's fascinating. I actually, damn, it kills me that like a community can be built like that. Like growing up as a kid who I loved pro wrestling, but I'm in Jersey. Not say there's not venues like if you're going to East Rutherford or you go to Philly or MSG, but like people are talking about the Phillies or the Yankees or the Giants more than they're talking about what Ric Flair was doing on TV last week. So it's dope to be able to see documentaries about facilities that can garner that type of community weekly coming in to go see some graps. I don't know. Like I said it before, but honestly, kudos to you for that. What were you gonna say?
Yeah, I was just going to say that's what was here. I mean, before the Carolina Panthers were here, before the Charlotte Hornets were here, before the Carolina Hurricanes were here, North Carolina had Rasslin, racing, and college basketball. And
Right.
college basketball is November to April. So when that's over, what are you doing? Racing came to maybe 3 tracks a couple of times a year in North Carolina. So like literally the sport.
Right.
Was wrestling. I mean, going between Greensboro, Charlotte, and Raleigh, and maybe a few other smaller towns every once in a while. That's what people did. That's what people talked about. And I mean, even Cliff talked about his family connection to it. My dad grew up going there with his dad, and then my maternal grandfather was in Virginia. He'd sell tobacco down in Durham, and then stop over in Raleigh for a night of wrestling before he went back up to Virginia. You know what I'm saying? So like. It's been a family thing, and I like to say that everybody, especially down south, has a wrestling story. Even if you're not a wrestling fan, you've watched it with your grandfather or grandmother, or you had a friend do a move on you or something. And so, wrestling, I think, isn't given its proper respect when talked about as a cultural institution in the United States of America. And I think that's part of what we set out to do with this is to give it its proper respect in that case, because you don't see it commemorated publicly outside of the wrestling space itself the way other sports are.
Right. Well, and again, I think that's part of it. I think is the community loves it, but it's still wrestling. I think the mainstream is still saying, oh, well, that's the pro wrestling. It's fake. It's whatever. You know what I mean? So, but I think that's why you can't find where exactly Roddy Piper got stabbed, or where that Ric Flair Buddy Landell match was. There wasn't people people weren't dedicated to making sure that stuff was notated then like it is now. At least not on the scale that it is, and you've got people. You could have somebody clocking in on that stuff from overseas. You know what I mean? And back then, if nobody cared enough to do it locally, it was piecemeal.
Well, and the funny thing to touch on that for a second, to me, talking about wrestling now and how people look at it, and I don't have an answer to this, but it's something that I've thought about a lot, particularly as, like Chris said, we try to take sort of a different, somewhat outside of the wrestling bubble approach to the doc. Is a lot of people, I mean, look, still a ton of people watch wrestling. WWE, AEW, their numbers are crazy, right? Like a lot of people are still watching wrestling, not quite like it used to be. But in the last couple of years, you had a stretch where the number one most watched television comedy was Young Rock, which is about a wrestler. One of the most popular shows on Netflix for years was Glow, which is about wrestling.
Yep.
So I often say, like, it's not the concept of wrestling that people don't want to watch or are turned off by. Sometimes it's just the presentation. And I know that that's true in the South. Like down here, people still want their wrestling. They want something. That's part of the reason that people got frustrated when wrestling went more mainstream, is that that sporting atmosphere and sporting environment that so captured their attention in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and so forth, kind of got lost to the more WWE, cartoon and ice cream bar style. And we're still kind of on that road to a degree today. So it's like, not only does everybody have a wrestling story, but most people are drawn to it. There is something about it that works, no matter what people think about it. They're not turned off by wrestling just as a rule. It's really about how you present it to people. And I think, like I said, I don't have an answer for that. I'm not WWE. That's not, that's not for me to find out. But I think from a documentary standpoint, that's how we tried to present it. It doesn't matter what you think about modern wrestling or what you think about, cutting on a show today. We're going to talk about the part of it that people know to be real, which is the culture, which is the environment, which is the feeling that people have. And that's, no matter how you feel about wrestling, that's real.
Right. There was, before we get out of here, I know we'll get out of here in a second, but at the end, because I kept looking at I was listening to, they had 5,000 people this one night. It looks like you can have like 5,000 to 7,000 people depending on what the setup is for certain events. But then at the end, it mentioned that I know big time wrestling has been there. And there has been wrestling there, but there's not been any like AEW's not run there. There's not been like there was footage from the big time wrestling show. Do you think would it be difficult for them to pull off a modern wrestling show in that venue?
Yeah. Just from a lighting perspective, like you talked about all the windows and all that,
right?
It's going to be, if you think about it from a production standpoint, it's going to be very hard to light that and, make sure that your cameras are working. I mean, because you're going to have color changes throughout. And if you know anything about that, like, your camera guys are going to be working extra hard, changing white balances and irises and things like that as the night goes along. Which, I mean, it's possible. You could do that, right? Because they have outdoor events. So it is still possible. But then also you have the no air conditioning, factor that's there. And then you have a situation where there's separate locker rooms on opposite sides that are basically underground. So there's no real backstage area. So like, there's probably some finagling or things they probably have to do to make it comfortable for them for something, a modern take to pro wrestling there at Dorton. But, it'll be tough. Maybe like an NWA. It'll be cool to see an NWA come back there. Essentially, they're building their product off of, venues like that in the past of that. So I think that would be cool to do, but I'm just not sure that it'll be advantageous for WWE. Maybe AEW, but I don't know. It's probably the size of venue that AEW should run, but I don't know.
If they were packing in 5,000 or so in the Jim Crockett Promotions era, I hate dating when I have these conversations, but last night's AEW was in Cardiff, Wales, and I think that place, it was like 4,200, and I think it was like damn near a sell. I want to say the tweet I saw, there were 3 tickets available the morning of the show, and it was like 4,200, 4,500, something like that. So that's where my head is going. But I think just thinking about the windows alone, I guess you'd have to stage it a real specific way, I'd imagine.
I think a house show makes a lot of sense, though. Like for WWE, they did a thing here. This was quite a few years ago now, but they did a Thanksgiving weekend Starcade show in the Greensboro Coliseum, but it was just house show setup. They've done other kind of historical shows around various places.
That was for, right?
Oh yeah, to counter program WrestleCade.
Those petty super shows, yeah.
But and they've done that in other places too, or other things. So I could see WWE. I think AEW is going to be doing more house shows in the near future, if the rumor mill is correct. So that makes a lot more sense to me than something televised. Just as Chris mentioned, all the it would cost so much to do it right, and then you have a cap on how many people you can fit in that building that I just don't know that the maths for a TV show, but house show makes sense.
And again, PNC Arena is right there, and WWE was there for Raw on the road to WrestleMania and had a sold out crowd of like 14,000 there. So it's when you could put 14,000 across the way and make more money, it's going to be tough to do that at Dorton.
My hope, my dream would be the next time Raw or SmackDown is at the PNC. They're like, down the road the Dorton Arena, and there's a documentary you could watch if you want to know about that pro wrestling history that you can watch on Peacock. Like, it's not hard to do. You can have that one for free, WWE. It's not that hard to do. It's just having the mindset to kind of connect those dots to the larger history of pro wrestling.
And that's the funny thing. Every time they come to PNC Arena, they say it's from the campus of NC State University.
Right.
And they show Carter Finley anyway for some reason. So they're right there. Just move the camera, tilt the camera this way.
As a North Carolina guy, right, and knowing that Vince McMahon, because that's a Vince McMahon thing, yes. And that's one of the things that kind of made me upset about him is like show your own state a little bit more, because he's from North Carolina originally. Show your own state a little bit more respect, because like Raleigh, it makes it seem like it's a small town, right? And it is compared to New York City or whatever, but it's market number 22 in the nation, and it's one of the fastest growing areas. If you look at areas that are building the most houses and having the most people come to it, you see Austin, Charlotte, and Raleigh.
Yeah.
These are the 3 areas in Orlando. Those are the 4 areas that are really booming right now. And like we're getting an Apple. Like Apple is putting their East Coast headquarters 10 minutes from my house. So it's this is a place that's booming. So like when you come here, give it a respect. It's the 2nd largest city in the state of North Carolina, but you go to Fayetteville, which is super small, call it Fayetteville, but you won't come to Raleigh and call it Raleigh. It's one of my little things, just my little ick.
you said earlier they put on that Super Show same weekend as WrestleCade. If Vince if he's from there and didn't like his time from there, I could see him being petty like that. I could see him being petty. He anyway. We could go down a whole rabbit hole talking about Vince McMahon petty. Now I wanted to thank you guys for having this conversation. It was really dope to talk to you about this amazing documentary that I hope if you've been watching this, you've either seen or there's going to be a link in the description down below. Once we're done, if you haven't seen it, click that. Quick watch. You can get a lot of wrestling stuff. Again, a lot of images, a lot of stories you've probably not heard about before. But before we go, Cliff and Chris, is there anything that you guys wanted to shout out? Anything you wanted to promote outside of this where people could get at you? The floor is yours.
I do want to say that there will be another showing of When Giants Walked Here, along with a discussion afterwards at WrestleCade, which is in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. That'll be Thanksgiving weekend.
Okay.
I think it's November 30th, but whatever that Saturday of that weekend is, you have a TNA, event that Friday. You have the WrestleCade main show, and then right after that main show, that's when we're going to have it there. So, it's going to be really cool to have that with the fans, and hopefully by then we'll have some merch and T-shirts and things like that for people. Also, so watch, support, because we do have plans for future projects. And so if we can get this to have some big numbers, then that means that we'll have space and possibly, funding to do something else. I would say just follow me at Chris Lea TV. You spell my last name Lea. And of course, keep up with me through Ashe Wrestling. And then continue to watch Ashe Wrestling and support Ashe Wrestling. And we got some big stuff coming up this year. Some stuff that you guys have been talking about, Khal, that you said, I hope that Ashe, does this at a certain point. Trust me, it's coming. And, I've seen it. I've seen the things, and things are coming.
Okay.
So.
Cliff.
Yeah. I can't be that exciting, but you can find me, Cliff Bumgardner, on Instagram, and my production company is called Slugline Media. We produce original films. So, like Chris said, he and I are going to have more coming, and other stuff outside of the wrestling world in the very near future. So, follow along.
Dope. Great to hear. Thank you guys again. At Khal on Twitter, at Black Rasslin, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube.com/Black Rasslin, Patreon.com/Black Rasslin. I think that's about it for this week, or for today.